The nature of social narrative. I think we can all agree these fellas all share the same professional moniker. No, not middle-aged white guy. These are all storytellers. And the media through which they choose to express themselves were originally designed to accommodate storytelling and only storytelling. But what do we call these folks? Creators of Facebook, Twitter, Halo, World of Warcraft, and Foursquare. They have all engaged audiences at very large scale, but not through traditional media constructs. Is there a common professional moniker they all share? They are clearly not storytellers, so what are they? Do Facebook and World of Warcraft share any narrative DNA? Do Halo and Foursquare have anything in common? What about Twitter and Grand Theft Auto? In terms of story, how do we categorize, say, the game of chess? Or Facebook, or Halo, or any game or social utility? Story certainly emerges from engaging with any of them, but is it storytelling? Games are part of the answer. Games have been around at least as long as written history. They are archetypal human behavior. There is evidence that the game of Senet was played in Egypt as far back as 3000 BC, before the invention of modern reading and writing. There are even claims that the Chinese invented the game of football long before it appeared in Europe. Gaming is archetypal human behavior that has been with us for all of human history. But in terms of story and narrative, games alone do not provide the guiding principles for the creative process and commercial exploitation of social constructs, not like we find so readily in the realm of storytelling. The answer lies in the differentiation of and relationship between the concepts of narrative, story, and programming. It's intuitively true that there is some form of narrative present within a game, a social networking site, or even a live sport, but it is not, strictly speaking, a storytelling narrative. Narrative is simply a framework and an agreement between a creator and audience. It is the relationship between that creator of experience and recipient, audience, or user of that created experience. So narrative is not story. Narrative is the context through which story emerges. So what of this notion of programming? Programming can take the form of communication, entertainment, or other forms of engagement. It is that stuff with which audiences engage. The terms program and programming are exactly the right terms to use, and we've seen the word used in many contexts. But programming is more than simply content. The full definition of programming indeed includes content, but it also includes context, community, commerce, and what we'll call code. In designing any experience, creators and business people should be apprised of the full definition of programming. As the inimitable Ernest Hemingway once said, "You can leave anything out as long as you know what it is." Context is the narrative structure, the understandings and agreements between creator and audience or user. It includes the rules, social mores, theme, and expectations to be set for the audience. Content is very simply that stuff consumed by the senses. That's it. Community is anything that connects us to audience, audience to us, or audience to audience. Commerce is any exchange of value. Dollars, pounds, euros, or mangoes. Value exchange can be metered in many ways. Code is a little trickier. It boils down to the instructions needed by a group of people or a device to render and manage the experience for the audience, and then respond to the reactions from their experience. This is the full definition of programming. The reason we tend to use the word content interchangeably with programming is that in traditional media, the intrinsic commerce and community dynamics were limited or non-existent, and in most mature media, the code, that is, the underlying technologies, has become all but invisible to both producer and audience, or until recently was technically unachievable. All this builds to what we call the primary colors of narrative: storytelling, story forming, and story dwelling. The exact same palette of programming can be drawn from in each, but the role that the programmer, or creator, and the audience play in each are markedly different. In storytelling, the role of programmer is that of auteur or presenter. The audience's role is one of observer. Their psychology is empathetic if the creator has done their job well, and their experience is passive. In story forming, the role of the creators has changed. Their job now is to build and manage story engines, through the use of which story emerges. Think of board games like chess or Monopoly, or video games like Halo. The audience's role becomes that of puppeteer. They are not the queen on the chessboard, or the boot piece in Monopoly, or Master Chief in Halo, but they are controlling them. And their psychology advances to influential. They are now influencing the order and evolution of the story. Their experience has become interactive versus passive. And finally, with story-dwelling narrative structures, the job of the programmer ultimately becomes that of world builder and manager. Whether Facebook or World of Warcraft or creating a field sport like football, the job is to create a space with attendant rules and culture, then manage and evolve it based on what the indigenous population does, not what we think they'll do. The audience's role transforms into participant. It is they, or an avatarish projection of themselves, immersed in this world. Their psychology becomes experiential instead of merely influential, and the overall experience is immersive. The roles of both programmer and audience are substantially different in each of these narrative constructs, as is the methodology for building programming for each realm, and the attendant business models and commercial dynamics are equally different. Storytelling requires the creation, distribution, marketing, and monetization of stories. Story forming requires the creation, distribution, marketing, and monetization of story engines. And story dwelling requires the creation, distribution, marketing, monetization, and management of worlds or spaces. Those worlds can be microcosms of the real world, a conference, a rave party, a court or field sport, virtual worlds like World of Warcraft, online social spaces like Facebook or YouTube, or social games like Farmville and Mob Wars. The narrative literacy for all of these seemingly disparate social constructs is of the same ilk, story dwelling, much like storytelling can have any number of formats or genre. Interestingly, these forms of narrative don't have to be treated as discrete. They are truly a continuum, and the frequent collapse and siloization of that continuum is due to limitations in technology, lack of expertise, or business imperatives. A good example of a full spectrum narrative experience by design is professional sports. Folks watching at home or in the pub are being told a story. The director in the truck is deciding what they see and what they don't see. The fans in the stadium, on the other hand, are directly influencing the outcome of the game. Any player will tell you the fans are the 12th man on the field, while the players actually on the field are fully immersed. And this example doesn't include the opportunities to engage audiences as participants via fantasy leagues, geosocial activities, and myriad other audience engagement opportunities now at our fingertips. Story dwelling is the nature of social narrative, constructs of engagement that have the DNA to become self-perpetuating. Storytelling constructs do not possess this characteristic, but the place for well-made and well-marketed storytelling constructs within or in conjunction with story-dwelling frameworks, that is, transmedia experiences, represents a commercial potential that remains largely untapped.